Uh, okay, good evening, everyone. I welcome you all for this AORA fellowship classes. Today, the topic for discussion is the infraclavicular brachial plexus block, so basically the costoclavicular and lateral infraclavicular. I have four fellows in my department. One is Dr. Gobin, Shaji, and Dr. Afreen, and Dr. Shweta and Dr. Sri Priyanka. Dr. Sri Priyanka, she is in a COVID ICU rotation. So leaving out, we have three fellows today to present the topic. How we have planned is we will split into three talks. The first one is about the anatomy in relation to the costoclavicular and lateral infraclavicular, that is infraclavicular blocks. That is an anatomy discussion. And then the second part is about the technique, how to position, how to insert the needle, what is the ideal drug spread, and all the technique related aspects. That is the second part. And finally, the third part is the dynamic assessment. Once you've deposited the drug, now what to expect? And the compare and contrast about the costoclavicular and lateral infraclavicular. So this is how we have laid down the framework for today's presentation. Anatomy first, block technique second, and finally the block dynamic assessment. So today we thought instead of a live presentation, we recorded all our PowerPoint with voiceover. So we are projecting it as a narrative PowerPoint. The second talk is a full video. The first talk one is a narrative PowerPoint, and the third talk also is a narrative PowerPoint. So this we thought we can avoid the last minute technical glitches that video is not playing or it's not satisfactory. So we thought we will already record it and then run once and then seen everything. Is it all right? And the time is well specified. So the first presentation is going to go about 10 minutes. The second presentation is about 15 minutes. And then the final dynamic presentation is about 25 minutes. So put together 45 minutes, we are going to discuss about this topic. I request all the fellows to note your points, your doubts, keep everything on recorded so that at the end, we will discuss whatever your thoughts, your ideas, your misunderstandings, or you're not understood something. So all those things you note it down now. At the end of the presentation, we will discuss, because if you start discussing in between, your question may be answered in the next presentation. So we will be wasting most of the time. So that's why I thought we will collect all your doubts now, and at the end we will have the discussion. And regarding the, we need to know all the fellows to be introduced. I thought to begin with we will do it, but it will delay the presentation. So Amit told we will finish it first, and then at the end we will have the introduction of all our fellows every time till we become familiarized with all of you. And I request Amit now to take the attendance so that we know how many people are there with us. Is it okay, Amit? And then we will move on to the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Over to you, Amit.
So we have AORA fellows with us. So I would just like to take attendance. Let me see.
We have received one apologies from Dr. Senthil from Mumbai. I think he said he has got some family commitments, so
Yeah.
his apology is accepted.
Sohini, Dr. Sohini Seth, is she there? Yeah. Then Dr. Maitri,
Yes, sir.
yeah, you can put your video on so that, yeah. Maitri, you can introduce yourself from which institute and all.
Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Maitreyi Kulkarni. I am doing my AORA fellowship from Ruby Health Clinic, Pune.
Okay.
And what was the joining date, Maitri? You can also, so
1st of February. Sir.
1st February. Okay. Dr. Priyanka, thank you, Maitri. Is Dr. Priyanka there? Then Dr. Pushpa.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So I'm Dr. Pushpa. I'm doing the fellowship from Jainagar Apollo under Dr. Murlidhar Tondebavi. I joined on January 1st. Sir.
1st January. Thank you. Thank you. Then Dr. Anand has left, I think, but then Dr. Durga also is not there. Dr. Atif Mohammed.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good
Yes,
evening.
sir. Yes, sir. My name is Dr. Atif Mohammed. I'm doing fellowship year of fellowship from Care Banjara Hills in Hyderabad under Dr. Gopal, sir. I joined from 1st Feb.
First Feb.
Yeah.
Yes. Then Dr. Kavana.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening to everyone. I've joined Mahavir Jain Hospital for pursuing ERA fellowship from February 1st under the guidance of Dr. Sudhakar Kopat, sir, Dr. Azam, sir, and Dr. Jagdish, sir.
Nice.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Dr. Sanjay S. Then Dr. Ashni Mehta.
Hi, that's me. Hi,
Afternoon, sir. I'm Dr. Sanjay S.
I'm Dr. Anand.
Okay. Dr. Sanjay S is there. Yes, Dr. Sanjay. Yeah, you can then first.
I'm from Bangalore, sir. I'm from Master RB. So I'm under Dr. Subramaniam and Dr. Deepak under the guidance of them. So I started my fellowship on 1st of February.
First of all. Yes, Dr. Ashni. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Ashni Mehta. Good evening, everybody. I'm a fellow of Ganga Hospital. I'm doing my fellowship under Dr. Bala Venkat, sir, and I've joined this fellowship from 1st January 2020.
1st January. Then Dr. Anamika Patel.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm Dr. Anamika. I've joined ERA fellowship under Dr. Ritesh Roy at Care Hospital, Bhubaneswar, and I have started my fellowship from 1st March 2020.
Okay. Dr. Ankita Mohta. Dr. Ankita.
Good evening, sir. I am from Care Hospital, Bhubaneswar, working under Dr. Ritesh Roy, sir. We started our fellowship from 1st March.
1st March. Thank you. Then Dr. Kamya Bansal. Dr. Kamya Bansal from Ludhiana. Yeah. Yes. I think Dr. Kamya, you are not audible. Okay. I think some internet issues.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Dr. Kamya Bansal from DMC Ludhiana.
Yeah.
I am a fellow under Dr. Rupinder Singh at Ludhiana, and I started my fellowship at around 1 August 2020.
1st of August, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Is anyone left? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. I'm Dr. Milind Shah. I'm doing my ERA fellowship from Kokilabin Dhirubhai Ambani Hospital under the guidance of Dr. Harshal sir. And I started my fellowship from 1st of March 2020.
1st of March. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So now, how many people are there, Amit? Now,
I've got around 11. I'll let you know in the end.
Okay, fine. The 11 fellows are there, and one apology has been submitted, so 12 together, isn't it? Is there anybody that they are absent, or
anyone
name?
I think few might have few might be missing.
Okay, fine. That's fine. That's fine. Just want to know, like, how many fellows are there and how many people are there. That's all it is. That's not to find a fault or something. And I wanted to impress everybody. We all make an effort to teach and then share our experience with you, unless if there is a good response from your side and the purpose is not served. So you are only people have to make this happen. So that's what my point. So with that, fine, I'm happy to see and welcome all the fellows for this class. And shall I move to the discussion, Ritesh?
Yeah, Shiva, we will move.
Yeah, okay. Then I will welcome the first presenter, Dr. Sanjeev and Shaji, and then you can proceed with your presentation. Over to Shaji.
Kindly mute their mic except the speaker, and kindly just switch off your video so that your bandwidth is okay and you can see the presentation non-stop. Yeah, Shiva, you can continue.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, President, ma'am.
Shall I start, sir?
Yeah, you can share your screen.
Yes, sir.
Thank
you. My name is Dr. Govind Shaji. I am doing a regional anesthesia fellowship from MGMCRI, Puducherry under the guidance. I shall now start playing my video.
Make it a full screen.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Shaji. I am a fellow in regional anesthesia from Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Research Institute, Puducherry. Today, we shall be talking about the topic relevant anatomy for the infraclavicular approach for brachial plexus block. Recap. The brachial plexus is formed by spinal nerve roots of C5 to T1. C5, C6 join together to form the upper trunk. C7 continues to be the middle trunk. C8 and T1 joins to form the lower trunk. From the upper, middle and lower trunk arises the anterior and posterior divisions. From the divisions arises the cords. From the anterior division of the upper trunk and the middle trunk arises the lateral cord. From the posterior division of all the three trunks comes the posterior cord. From the anterior division of the lower trunk comes the medial cord. And from the cords arises the terminal branches. The interscalene block is performed at the level of the trunks, while the supraclavicular block is performed at the level of the anterior and posterior divisions of the trunks. The infraclavicular block is performed at the level of the cords, while the axillary block is performed at the level of the terminal branches. Now we shall come to a topic. The infraclavicular brachial plexus block is performed at the infraclavicular fossa. The infraclavicular fossa is divided into medial infraclavicular fossa, which lies from the lateral part of the first rib to the medial part of the pectoralis minor. From the medial part of the pectoralis minor to the lateral part of pectoralis minor, the area behind it or the below it is called the lateral infraclavicular fossa. From the lateral part of pectoralis minor, it is the axilla. The costoclavicular space is the space that lies between the clavicle and first and the second rib. This is the area through which the nerves and the vessels comes out. So for the purpose of providing infraclavicular brachial plexus block, the most relevant is the costoclavicular space and the lateral infraclavicular space fossa. So how do we know where we are? As all the areas contains the nerves, the artery and the veins. If we are seeing the pectoralis minor muscle while doing an ultrasound, that means you are in the lateral infraclavicular fossa. If you see the cephalic vein draining into the axillary vein or the thoracoacromial artery coming out from the axillary artery while doing an ultrasound, that means you are in the medial infraclavicular fossa. The costoclavicular space is the space between the clavicle and the ribs. So while providing or while doing ultrasound, the clavicle is insinuated and the muscle that you see is the subclavius muscle. So if the costoclavicular area is the area that is sandwiched between the subclavius muscle and the serratus anterior. Here you can see the nerves and the vessels. So this is the image showing the probe position for providing costoclavicular block and the lateral infraclavicular block. So this is a video showing the gross anatomy of the costoclavicular space. The costoclavicular space is the space behind the clavicle. So you can see the subclavius muscle here, which is below the clavicle. You can see it getting extended while retracting or pulling the clavicle. So the clavicle has been cut for better visualization. So the axillary vein can be seen. Then lateral to it is the axillary artery, and you can see the brachial plexus elements lying further away from the vessels, more cephaloid to the vessels. So this sectional anatomy image will make it more clear. The area behind the clavicle is the costoclavicular space. It is bounded anteriorly by the subclavius and the pectoralis major, and it is bounded posteriorly by the serratus anterior. So the area between the clavicle and the ribs is the costoclavicular space. The boundaries are the subclavius and the pectoralis major, and anteriorly and posteriorly the serratus anterior. So here you can see the costoclavicular space, the brachial plexus elements, the lateral cord, the posterior cord, and the medial cord can be seen lying lateral to the axillary artery and the axillary vein. Here you can see a sonoanatomic picture of the costoclavicular space. Here, as explained earlier, you can, while doing an ultrasound, you can see the pectoralis major muscle, the subclavius muscle. The brachial plexus elements can be seen lateral to the axillary artery and the axillary vein, and below it you can see the serratus anterior. This is actually this is not the second rib, this is the lung, and this will be the intercostal muscle. So this image will show you the brachial plexus elements lying together. The topmost is the lateral cord, and the one closer to the axillary artery will be the medial cord, and away will be the posterior cord. So this is an image showing the lateral infraclavicular fossa. In video showing the lateral infraclavicular fossa gross anatomy. The pectoralis minor muscle is reflected. The area below the pectoralis minor is the lateral infraclavicular fossa. This is the axillary vein. Here will be the axillary artery. This is the lateral cord, which continues as the median nerve. This is the musculocutaneous nerve. Here you can see the medial cord, which continues as the medial cutaneous nerve of forearm. This is the ulnar nerve. This is the medial cutaneous nerve of arm. And after reflecting the vessels, you can see the posterior cord, which continues as the radial nerve. So this is a sectional anatomic image. Here you can see the lateral infraclavicular fossa is bounded anteriorly by the pectoralis major muscle and the pectoralis minor muscle, and below it is the subscapularis muscle. Here you can see the axillary artery being surrounded by the lateral cord, posterior cord, and the medial cord of the brachial plexus. Here is an image showing the sonoanatomy. As explained earlier, the above-most structure is the pectoralis major muscle. Below it you can see the pectoralis minor muscle. Below it you can make out the axillary artery and the axillary vein, and you can make out the axillary, the lateral cord, the posterior cord, and the medial cord, and you can see the subscapularis muscle. So in this image it is very clear that the axillary artery, the brachial plexus bunch, lies surrounding the artery, unlike the costoclavicular space. So this is a video scanning showing the scans of the brachial plexus when from costoclavicular to lateral infraclavicular area. Here you can see the pectoralis major, pectoralis minor, and serratus anterior, and the brachial plexus elements are lying together. So this is the costoclavicular space. On further scanning medially, you can go in laterally. From further scanning laterally, you can see the cephalic vein draining into the axillary vein, and now the thoracoacromial artery can be seen coming out from the axillary artery. So that is the medial infraclavicular fossa. So on further scanning again laterally, it goes into the lateral infraclavicular fossa. So again we are further scanning laterally. So now you can see the pectoralis major muscle, the pectoralis minor muscle, and you can see the axillary artery being surrounded by the neural elements of the brachial plexus. So this is the lateral infraclavicular fossa. In short, in the costoclavicular space, you can see the pectoralis major, the subclavius, the brachial plexus elements, the axillary artery vein. Below it, you can see the serratus anterior and the rib. In the medial infraclavicular fossa, you can see the cephalic vein draining into the axillary vein and the axillary artery, and also you can see the thoracoacromial artery coming out from the axillary artery. And keeping the probe in the lateral infraclavicular fossa, you can see the pectoralis major, the pectoralis minor, the axillary artery, the nerve around the axillary artery, and the axillary vein. So what is the relevance to regional anesthesia? In costoclavicular area, the brachial plexus bunch lies together lateral to the axillary artery and the vein. And here you can see the lung lies behind the rib and it is very closer to the structures. So while providing a block here, the chances of injuring the lung are very high. But since the bunch brachial plexus group is lying together, it can be given as a single point injection. But in the case of lateral infraclavicular fossa, here you can see the brachial plexus elements are lying around the artery, but the posterior border is the subscapularis muscle. So the chances of injury to the lung are reduced in lateral infraclavicular fossa. Thank you. In the coming up presentation, my colleague Dr. Shweta will be talking on how to perform these blocks.
Yes, Shweta, you can start your presentation on the technique. I request all the fellows to keep your doubts. I mean, whatever you are not having a clarity or confused, you keep all the things documented. We will discuss at the end. Over to Shweta.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Shweta. I'm doing my fellowship in regional anesthesia under Dr. Shiva Shanmugam. I'll be starting with my presentation now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Shweta, Regional Anesthesia Fellow from MGMCRI Puducherry. Today, I'll be demonstrating on a volunteer two infraclavicular approaches to block the brachial plexus, that is, costoclavicular approach and lateral infraclavicular approach. As my colleague has already discussed in his anatomical description, our targets to these approaches are the cords. The difference between the approaches are the cords are clustered together lateral to the axillary artery and vein in costoclavicular space, whereas they radiate around the artery in the lateral infraclavicular approach. First, we'll look at costoclavicular approach. A good rule of thumb to follow for this approach is rule of 2. That is, cords are sandwiched between two muscles, subclavius and serratus anterior. Cords lie lateral to two vessels, axillary artery and vein. Cords are targeted over second rib. Starting with ergonomics, we have the patient supine with a small pillow under the head turned to the other side and arm abducted to 90 degrees. Sometimes we may not be able to abduct the arm due to pain or fracture. In those situations, we can slightly bend the elbow and place it by the side of the patient, or it can be supported. Abducting the shoulder to 90 degrees is very important as it moves the clavicle away and allows us to scan the plexus 2 cm more proximally. Abducting the shoulder will ensure that we target the bottleneck of the brachial plexus before they radiate around the axillary artery or give off branches. For the purpose of demonstration, I'm sitting by the side of the patient. I'll discuss the ergonomics for different needling techniques and their difficulties later. We'll select high frequency linear probe as we expect the target structures to be within 4 centimeters. Step 1 is to place the probe over the clavicle at the midpoint. This will cut the image slightly in a coronal plane. After placing the probe over the clavicle, we observe its acoustic shadow. Second step is to drop down from the clavicle and insinuate to try and visualize the structures behind the clavicle. I am dropping down from the clavicle and trying to insinuate under the clavicle. This is the ultrasound image we see. We can see the axillary artery and the vein medially, subclavius muscle above and serratus anterior below, and the lateral medial and posterior cord sandwiched between these two muscles. Third step is image optimization. Get the cords in the center of the screen between the subclavius and the serratus anterior muscle. Step 4 is we need to ensure that we are as proximal as possible. We know that just distal to the second rib, cephalic vein drains into the axillary vein, and further distal, thoracoacromion artery branches from the axillary artery. So if we see either of those vessels, we are not in the costoclavicular space and we have to scan more proximally. As I scan distally, we can see the cephalic vein draining into the axillary vein. If I scan further distal to the cephalic vein drainage, we can see the thoracoacromion artery branching from the axillary artery. Step 5 is to ensure that pleura is not visible in our image. If pleura is visible, we need to adjust the probe to get the second rib under the targets so that even if the needle is advanced, it will only hit the rib, it won't puncture the pleura. Now once I adjust the probe, you can see the lung sliding under the targets. I adjust the probe, target structures lie over the rib. Next, we'll see ergonomics, needling technique and local anesthetic deposition. For costoclavicular space, out of plane approach, the performer stands by the side of the patient and facing the patient with monitor in direct line of view. You can see the needle placement. Patient's head is towards the right, probe is placed over the clavicle, and the needle entry is from caudal in out of plane. This recording shows the local anesthetic deposition in the costoclavicular space. The drug is deposited in the center of the cluster. Now the needle is redirected medially. You can see the drug spread around the medial cord. Coming to in-plane needle placement in the costoclavicular space, the performer sits or stands at the head end with the monitor in direct line of view. For in-plane approach in costoclavicular space, as you can see, the probe is tilted so much, and for needle visualization, needle has to be passed in the same angle as the probe, which is a challenge. This shows the in-plane needle placement and LA deposition in the costoclavicular space. As you can see, it is difficult to direct the needle to the center of the cords. You can see the drug spread around the cords. This is a scan of supraclavicular area after costoclavicular block. This is after 20 ml of drug deposition at the costoclavicular space. C5, C6 roots join to form the upper trunk. This is the middle trunk here. And this is C8 root. You can see that the drug has spread up to the upper trunk. The upper trunk is dividing into anterior and posterior division. This is the anterior division and this is the posterior division. C8 and T1 is joining here to form the inferior trunk. We can also notice the drug spread around suprascapular nerve. Next, I will be demonstrating lateral infraclavicular approach. Patient is positioned supine with arm abducted. Performer sits at the head end with the machine in direct line of view. Scanning is done in the deltopectoral group. That is just medial to the coracoid process. Probe is placed in this area vertically down below the clavicle. This cuts the image in a sagittal plane. In the lateral infraclavicular area, the cords have radiated to their position. We see the cords around the artery at 10, 3 and 6 o'clock positions under the pectoral muscles and lie over subscapularis muscle. Block should be performed after ensuring pleura is not in the window. Probe should be moved laterally if pleura is visualized. To perform the lateral infraclavicular approach, performer stands at the head end with the machine in direct line of view. Needle can be inserted in plane from the cephalic end. Here the probe is placed below the clavicle and the needle entry is from the head end. Here you can see the needle being inserted in plane. You can see the local anesthetic spread around the lateral cord. Now the needle has been redirected to the medial cord. Local anesthetic spread around the medial cord. The needle is withdrawn to the lateral cord and drug is injected around the lateral cord. Now the needle is being passed below the axillary artery and the local is injected around the posterior cord. A total of 15 ml of local anesthetic was deposited in the lateral infraclavicular area. This is costoclavicular space shown after lateral infraclavicular brachial plexus block. Drug spread here is not very clear. This is supraclavicular scan after lateral infraclavicular block. We don't see any drug spread here. Unlike costoclavicular block, we don't see any drug spread around suprascapular nerve here. This concludes my presentation. Now my colleague Dr. Afreen will discuss about the dynamics and outcomes of infraclavicular blocks. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Afreen. I'm a fellow in regional anesthesia in Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Research Institute, Pondicherry, under Dr. Shiva Shanmugam, sir. Yeah. I'll be playing my video on my block dynamics now.
Good evening, everybody. In continuation of my colleague's discussion on the anatomy and the technique of infraclavicular brachial plexus block, I will be talking about the dynamics of these blocks. So now that we've seen the where to inject the drug and how to inject the drug, I want to discuss about what will happen after we inject the drug. What are the practical applications of this drug spread in and from the infraclavicular area. This will be the basis of my presentation today as I try and seek answers to some of these questions pertaining to infraclavicular brachial plexus block. My objectives of today's presentation will be to map the sensory and the motor outcome of these blocks, their applications in the ORs, to discuss the literature pertaining to the success rates of these blocks, and the technicalities of the block, such as the minimum effective local anesthesia volume for each block, single versus multiple injection, anticipated complications, and finally a note about the retroclavicular approach to the infraclavicular area. First, I'd like to talk about the effects of blocking the brachial plexus at the infraclavicular zones. So, like my colleagues have already highlighted, the part of the brachial plexus that we are targeting here is the cords. So, in theory, the infraclavicular brachial plexus block blocks all the cords and hence all the terminal branches of the clots. The terminal branches include the axillary nerve, the musculocutaneous nerve, the radial nerve, the medial nerve, and the ulnar nerve. So the branches that are given off prior to the formation of the cords, such as the dorsal scapular nerve, the suprascapular nerve, the subclavius nerve, long thoracic nerve, are all spared in theory. So this translates to a sensory blockade of the hand, forearm, and arm except the intercostobrachial territory, and a motor blockade of the muscles of the hand and the forearm. To compare and contrast the outcomes of the two common approaches to the intraclavicular blocks, that is the costoclavicular and the lateral intraclavicular approach, we performed these blocks in 2 patients with similar volumes of local anesthesia, assessed them at similar times post-block. That is, we performed the blocks with 20 ml of local anesthesia in each of the 2 patients and assessed them at 20 minutes post-block. And how did we do the sensory and the motor assessment of our blocks? For sensory, we used ice cold pack to map the sensory, to map the areas in which they were able to perceive the cold and areas in which they were not able to perceive the cold. And for the motor, we assessed the motor function of the individual muscles of the upper limb. So this was the sensory outcome of the costoclavicular block, in which we can see that there was involvement of the entire skin over the entire hand and the forearm, also the arm, except the area of the superficial cervical plexus. Also, this was a sensory outcome in the patient in whom we had performed the lateral intraclavicular fossa block. This showed a similar sensory mapping with involvement in the distal forearm and hand and also in the arm, except this area, which is the intercostobrachial and the C3-C4 zone. On analyzing the sensory mapping, we can see that both these blocks produce a sensory blockade of the skin over the hand, the forearm, and the arm, except of course the area which is supplied with the C4, the supraclavicular nerves of the superficial cervical plexus and the intercostobrachial territory. In fact, we'd like to take a moment here to stress that this is the sensory involvement of the brachial plexus at any level, be it the supraclavicular or the intraclavicular area or even the truncal level, if the drug does not seep and cause blockade of the C3-C4 or the superficial cervical plexus nerves. Next, about the motor assessment. For motor assessment, we picked one muscle supplied by one nerve each of the upper limb to assess the motor function. So this is the reference video showing the assessment of each of these nerves, each of the nerves supplying the upper limb, picking one muscle each. Long thoracic nerve, assessment for spinal accessory nerve, shrugging of shoulders, assessment of the pectorals, abduction, different degrees caused by different muscles, flexion at the elbow caused by musculocutaneous nerve brachioradialis, extension at the thumb caused by the radial nerve, adduction and abduction of fingers by the interossei supplied with the ulnar nerve, opponent's pollicis by the median nerve, and opponent's digiti minimi by the ulnar nerve. Following is the video of the motor assessment of the patient in whom we had given costoclavicular block with 20 ml of a mixture of local anesthetic. This patient was unable to abduct his arm. He was not able to flex his elbow or move his wrist. Neither was he able to move his fingers. So the muscles of the forearm and hand were all blocked. So the inability to raise his arm, even the initial 15 degrees, implies that the supraspinatus muscle supplied with the suprascapular nerve was also involved. So, has the drug that we gave in the costoclavicular space spread up to the level of the trunk to the suprascapular nerve? Yes. Is this what we saw in the ultrasound scanning of the drug spread that was demonstrated by Dr. Shweta? Yes. Is this a consistent finding with costoclavicular blocks? So evaluating this, we found a study that evaluated the spread of costoclavicular brachial plexus block, an anatomical study in which 5 cadavers were chosen and ultrasound guided costoclavicular block was given with 20 ml of dye, and the cadavers were then dissected to find the extent of the dye spread. So seeing the extent of the dye spread, we can see that in all of the cadavers the dye spread proximally and soaked all the trunks, cords and divisions of the brachial plexus, even the suprascapular nerve. So the suprascapular nerve was involved in all 5 of 5 cadavers. So our clinical observation compounded with this anatomical studies implies that the costoclavicular block can be explored as an option for shoulder surgery. There are studies that compare the costoclavicular block supplemented with suprascapular nerve block for shoulder surgeries. There are no published studies at present which compare the sole costoclavicular block for shoulder surgery, and this is an avenue that needs to be explored. In our next patient, in whom we had given a lateral intraclavicular fossa block with 20 ml of local anesthesia mixture, this was the motor assessment. He was not able to bring his arms forward, showing the involvement of the pectorals. He was able to raise his arm for the initial 15 to 20 degrees, beyond which he was not able to lift his arm. The muscles of the forearm were involved. He was not able to flex his forearm. He was not able to extend his wrist. He was able to lift his thumb at the time of this assessment, which is at 20 minutes. He later was lost at 30 minutes. His scapula is not winking. So this shows that here he was not able to abduct his arm for the initial 15 degrees, which means the supraspinatus muscle action is intact or it is spared. So the suprascapular nerve is not involved here in the lateral intraclavicular fossa block that we gave. Okay, what is the consistency of this finding? So we found an article which evaluated the effect of the lateral intraclavicular brachial plexus block on the axillary and the suprascapular nerves by electromyography. So they defined the reduction of surface electromyography by more than 50% as a positive block, and they found that in only 25% of their patients was the suprascapular nerve involved after giving a LICF block, whereas 90% of the patients had blockade of the axillary nerve and all the other nerves that supply the muscles of the forearm and the hand. Hence, this suggests that the lateral intraclavicular block inconsistently spreads to the suprascapular nerve, and hence its utility in shoulder surgeries as a sole modality is questionable. To sum up, infraclavicular blocks cause dense blockade at the level of the cords and distal to the cords, so they can be used for surgeries from the distal arm to the hand, but costoclavicular block as a sole block needs to be explored for shoulder surgeries. Let's next talk about the success rate of intraclavicular blocks. The intraclavicular blocks have shown to have quite high success rates in terms of blockade of the terminal nerves, irrespective of the anatomical approach. Both the lateral intraclavicular fossa and the costoclavicular approaches have shown fairly good success rates. This is the data from studies that used only either one of the blocks. But what happened when both these approaches were compared though? A study by Dr. Manoj Karmakar and team compared both the approaches to the intraclavicular block and showed significantly higher rates of sensory and sensory motor blockade with the costoclavicular block at 20 minutes post-block, but this difference was not found at 45 minutes post-block. So this shows that the time to readiness for surgery was earlier in the costoclavicular block. So they hypothesized that this difference is because this injection at the center of the cord cluster in the costoclavicular space is a subfacial injection, which is similar to that at the supraclavicular fossa. And a subfacial injection will result in faster onset of the sensory motor blockade of the brachial plexus by reducing the extraneural diffusion time. So what about the success of the supraclavicular versus intraclavicular blocks? A systemic review of 10 RCTs comparing the supraclavicular and intraclavicular brachial plexus blocks showed that there is a higher incidence of incomplete ulnar nerve block in the supraclavicular group, whereas there is a higher incidence of incomplete radial nerve block in the intraclavicular group. And further, when a subgroup analysis was done, it was shown that this difference in incomplete radial nerve block was reduced to not significant levels when the intraclavicular block was given as multiple injections. Now, a study that compared ultrasound guided supraclavicular and costoclavicular technique, not intraclavicular techniques in general, but costoclavicular technique in particular, using a modified double injection technique for both the supraclavicular and the costoclavicular approaches, found that there was no difference in sensory or motor block between the two approaches at any of the times.
So, between the costoclavicular and the lateral infraclavicular approach, it was found that the costoclavicular approach has faster onset time and faster readiness for surgery. Between supraclavicular and the costoclavicular approaches, it was found that both data were comparable. Between supraclavicular and the lateral intraclavicular fossa approaches, it was found that there was a higher incidence of incomplete radial nerve block in the lateral infraclavicular group, which was minimized by giving it as double or triple injection, and there was a higher incidence of incomplete ulnar nerve block in the supraclavicular group.
So our next pressing question is, how much drug should we inject to get a good block? One of the advantages that is quoted with the costoclavicular approach is that the volume of local anesthesia can be reduced. We did a literature search to find studies that have determined the minimum effective local anesthesia volume for each of these approaches, and they found that the costoclavicular approach, it was only 20 ml. This study was a recent study published in the European Journal of Anesthesia, published by Dr. Manoj Karmakar sir and team. Similarly, studies that have established the minimum effective local anesthesia volume for LICF, that is the lateral intraclavicular approach, was found to be between 30 to 32 ml, whereas there was one study that even determined the minimum effective volume for the retroclavicular approach, which has shown that the minimum effective volume, 95% patients for the retroclavicular approach, was found to be around 23.2 ml. Another technical aspect of the block is whether we give it as a single injection or divide the local anesthesia in aliquots and give it as multiple injection. In lateral intraclavicular fossa, since the cords are all scattered around the axillary artery, each cord has to be targeted separately. Whereas in the costoclavicular approach, a single injection in the middle of the nerve cluster has been shown to cause drug spread to all the three cords. But there are even recent studies that favor double injection even in the costoclavicular approach, because they state that there might be a fascia of connective tissue that compartmentalize the cords and cause incomplete local anesthesia spread. So a study published in 2019 in RAPM by Hadzik et al. Suggested that they found a linear septum-like structure in 92.5% of patients when the ultrasound images were studied retrospectively. This linear septum was found separating the lateral cord from the medial cord and the lateral cord from the medial cord and the posterior cord. So this is something that we have to be conscious about and look out for while giving a costoclavicular block to get better success rates. Is intraclavicular space ideal for catheter placement? So we've all known that the supraclavicular space is not always a good area. It's less than ideal space for catheters because the catheters get dislodged easily because of the short space in the neck. On the other hand, the intraclavicular area is well suited for catheter placement because the catheter gets stabilized well within the musculature in that area. In the costoclavicular approach, the catheter is inserted in plane. The tip is kept close to the center of the nerve cluster, that is close to all the three cords, and it has been postulated that as low as 4 to 6 ml per hour of drug is enough for effective postoperative analgesia. In the lateral infraclavicular fossa, the question arises, since the cords are all scattered around the artery, the question arises as to where we should keep the tip for an ideal postoperative analgesia or intraoperative anesthesia. So, again in lateral intraclavicular fossa, the catheter is inserted in plane and the tip is kept posterior to the artery at 6 o'clock position, that is near the posterior cord. A good strategy to prevent dislodgement would be to loop the catheter at the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor while removing the needle out. So this was a study published by Vrishali ma'am, in which they inserted intraclavicular brachial plexus catheters for pediatric patients undergoing forearm surgery. They studied the effectiveness of the catheter by keeping the catheter tip near the posterior cord. They studied both the contrast spread through the catheter as well as the postoperative pain scores in the patients, and they found that this is an ideal location to place the catheter tip, which causes good neurovascular spread and good effect. So what complications should we worry about when we give intraclavicular blocks? The complications of intraclavicular brachial plexus blocks can be both generic ones like block failure, nerve injury, infection, hematoma formation, systemic toxicity of the local anesthesia, and catheter-related complications such as displacement, intravascular placement, or kinking. So the ones which are more specific to the intraclavicular brachial plexus block, apart from vascular puncture because of close proximity to the vascular structures, is pneumothorax, which is 0.7%, especially in the costoclavicular approach, because the medial side of the window will be formed by the pleura, and phrenic nerve palsy about 3%, that too again in the costoclavicular space, because a large volume of local anesthesia drug can track proximally upwards. So this was a study that compared the rate of complications, especially the hemidiaphragmatic paralysis, in supraclavicular versus costoclavicular blocks, which was published recently in 2020. And they found that there is significantly higher incidence of hemidiaphragmatic paralysis in supraclavicular block compared to the costoclavicular block. In fact, they suggested that higher the volume of local anesthesia in the costoclavicular block, more is the likelihood of phrenic nerve blockade, to the extent of every 10 ml of local anesthesia above 15 ml increases this likelihood by threefold. There is a similar study that was conducted in our own institute, where we studied the ipsilateral hemidiaphragmatic paresis after a supraclavicular and costoclavicular block. Again, the supraclavicular group was found to have HTP in 45% of the patients, whereas it was found to occur only in 5% of the patients in the costoclavicular group. We further studied the clinical significance of this hemidiaphragmatic paresis. So, in those patients with a hemidiaphragmatic paresis, it was found that the baseline peak expiratory flow rate dropped by about 32%. This 32% drop is quite a significant amount for those patients with poor pulmonary reserve. So, for those patients with poor pulmonary reserve, the costoclavicular approach will be a very good alternative to the supraclavicular approach, where there might be more incidence of phrenic nerve palsy causing hemidiaphragmatic paresis. The other complications that are also seen in the supraclavicular group compared to the costoclavicular group, more incidence of Horner syndrome. The next thing that I'm going to be talking about is the retroclavicular approach to the infraclavicular region. So this is a largely unexplored approach to the infraclavicular region, which is a few articles have come in the recent times. This is one of the first descriptions of the retroclavicular approach, in which they have postulated that approaching the infraclavicular space from above the clavicle through the neck can be a very good approach for better needle visibility. So what they are saying is, in the lateral intraclavicular block, since the needle is injected at a very steep trajectory, the visibility of the needle is very poor. So, whereas if we go parallel to the ultrasound probe by approaching it from behind the clavicle, then since the ultrasound rays are reflected off at 90 degrees, the needle visibility is excellent, and a lower volume of drug can also be given. The only challenge with this is the blind zone, where we traverse behind the clavicle for about 3 centimeters. The advantages are that the arm does not have to be abducted. So this is a very good option in the acute ER setup. Also, the needle visibility is really good. It targets the cords at the level of the intraclavicular region, so it's a very compact injection as well. So, except for the challenge of traversing behind the clavicle, this is an option that has come out that needs to be explored. So to sum up, I'd like to just sort out the differences between the costoclavicular and the lateral intraclavicular approaches to the intraclavicular brachial plexus. The costoclavicular space is located between the pectoralis major and the subclavius muscle anteriorly and the serratus anterior over the second rib posteriorly, whereas the lateral intraclavicular space is located deep to the pectoral muscles. In the costoclavicular fossa, the cords are related to the first part of the axillary artery, whereas in the LICF, they are related to the second part of the axillary artery. The costoclavicular space, the cords are only about 2 cm from the skin, whereas in the LICF, they are at depth of 3 to 6 centimeters from the skin. The cords are all clustered together in the costoclavicular space, whereas in the lateral intraclavicular fossa, they are all separated from one another. And they're all variable in position with relation to the axillary artery, whereas in the costoclavicular space, they hold a consistent relation to one another and to the axillary artery. So in the ultrasound window, it's easy to visualize all the 3 cords in one window. It's difficult to get a single window with all the 3 cords. The drug injection is at the center of the nerve cluster in the costoclavicular space, whereas multiple injections are required for an effective block in lateral intraclavicular. So local volume, volume of local anesthesia that we can use is also lower, whereas with this leads a larger volume. Posteriorly, the lung and the pleura lie posteriorly in the costoclavicular space, so we have to be wary of causing pneumothorax. Whereas in the lateral intraclavicular space, it's relatively safer where the lung and the pleura are not related posteriorly. So, in conclusion, the intraclavicular brachial plexus block is quite an effective block with a good success rate and dense blockade, which is good for forearm, elbow, and hand surgeries. The advantage is that it holds over the more proximal blocks such as the interscalene and supraclavicular block is that there's a more reliable blockade of the ulnar nerve. There are fewer adverse events such as hemidiaphragmatic palsy, Horner's syndrome, and it's also a better suited place for catheters. Whereas compared to the more distal axillary block approach, the intraclavicular block has advantages such as the fact that the arm does not have to be mandatorily abducted like an axillary block. And in the axillary block, there are early branches of the medial cutaneous nerve of forearm, musculocutaneous nerve, axillary nerve and all, which might have, because of which we might miss these branches in the axillary block, which is all avoided in the intraclavicular block. The take-home points from my talk are that the costoclavicular block is a good block where the drug spreads up to the trunk level and the utility in the shoulder surgery can be explored. It is a faster onset, lower volume requiring block. In costoclavicular block, we should also always look out for the septum that might separate the lateral cord from the other 2 cords. The catheter in lateral intraclavicular fossa should be placed near the tip should be placed near the posterior cord. And lower volumes in the costoclavicular approach avoid complications such as hemidiaphragmatic palsy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are exactly on time at 7:30. So half an hour is there for the discussion. The presentation is open for a discussion to all the fellows. So first, let us discuss. If you have any doubts at the presentation, any things which you are not understood, or you are not agreeing, or in your perception it is different, or your experience is something else. So those things we can discuss. In this presentation, we have not talked about the PNS guided infraclavicular brachial plexus block. That's unfortunate because we are not practicing it routinely, and unfortunately we didn't have the case to do that. So since we are busy in recording this, so let us make it more clear. So that's the only thing, it's nothing else. So I wanted the mentors of any of us who are doing it routinely with the PNS can just talk about that, how you will exactly do it, what is the end point. This is what we are seeing through the ultrasound, but how you do it with the PNS and at what point you will, maybe Ethel sir and Tushali madam can just to tell the fellows that how we can do that with the PNS, and then we will move on to the discussion.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, basically I do it with PNS. I do both pericoracoid approach and VIB. For VIB, you have to palpate the suprasternal notch, then go for acromion process, then draw the line, go at the midpoint. It is just like costoclavicular approach. So all three chord lies lateral to the artery. So with single injection, you can block all three chords. Usually I go for posterior chord response. If I get posterior chord response, drug will spread to lateral and medial chord as well. In coracoid approach, I palpate coracoid process, go 2 centimeter medial to it and 2 centimeter inferior to it. Here, usually we find lateral chord response first, but we look for posterior chord response, because if you inject 30 ml of LA there, drug will spread in U shape toward medial chord as well as towards the lateral chord. So single injection for lateral approach is also good. But if you can inject it with a 2 injection, like for lateral chord and posterior chord, then success rate is higher. So pericoracoid approach is just like lateral approach, our lateral approach with ultrasound, and VIB is just like our costoclavicular approach. Rushari madam, do you want to add anything?
Hetal has already said. Perhaps what I could add is maybe blocking somebody who's very lean and thin, adolescent, or a child maybe. So child, whatever kilogram the child is, we would really anchor the block just beneath the coracoid process. So we forget all about all other approaches in this population. So we just palpate the humerus and then keep palpating towards the clavicle, and whatever bony prominence you feel in amidst both of them, or rather from the clavicle towards the humerus or the other way around, the first bony prominence that you ever feel always is a coracoid process. In fact, all the fellows, you can palpate and see your own coracoid process. It's very, very easy. You need not change the arm position as well. I'm talking about this in children. Just beneath the coracoid process, you drop the needle straight perpendicular to see the following responses. This is something which has to be extremely clear in your mind. If you see a flexion response, leave it. Do not give any attention to it. That's not that you need to block. If you see any local twitches, leave it alone. Proceed further. When you start seeing the contractions here, this is medial cord. When you start seeing this or this becomes a posterior cord. And when you start seeing this becomes the ulnar aspect of it. That makes it medial cord as well. So it has to be a response low at the wrist or at the forearm of pronation and supination. So this is what you need to see, and then give the injection at around, say, 0.5 or 0.25%, 0.5 ml of ropivacaine or bupivacaine, whatever you use. So that's the only difference that I see.
Okay, thank you, Madam Aman. Is there any fellows? Do you have any doubts, or do you have any experience? So now in comparison with ultrasound, as we said that if you place the needle at the posterior to the artery, the chance of spread of the local anesthetic to all other components are good. So in essential, when you go down to 15 to 20 ml, the LF, the lateral infraclavicular fossa, it's more like a peripheral nerve block, because all the cords are moved around axillary artery and they become independent with their own sheaths. Whereas in costoclavicular, they are together, so we can call it as a plexus, whereas when it comes to the lateral infraclavicular, we may not be able to, because the single point injection, unless you use a very high volume, it is unlikely to soak all the components. So the simple compact. So when in ultrasound, we can see everything, whereas in PNS, you should ensure your injection is perfectly at the hand muscles, not in the flexion of the elbow or at the shoulders. So one question from Rupinder ma'am, any experience with low frequency probe in obese patients? Yes, I mean, it is obvious whenever we are difficult to see it, we automatically switch to the low frequency probe and accept the needle visibility is going to be a challenge. That time we will use the other modality like hydrolocation, tissue distensions, and color Doppler to fairly locate our thing. So it will become an automatic reflex phenomenon to choose an ideal probe which gives the better image.
I have a,
And use, okay. Hello.
Hi, Rupinder ma'am, go ahead.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
So, yeah. So, what I wanted to ask was, usually in my clinical practice, what I have seen is that whenever you target the posterior cord, the effect of the block is absolutely immediate. I mean, if the first your needle point is towards the posterior cord, if you go towards the lateral cord or the medial cord, the onset of action of the block is delayed. That is what I have usually seen in my clinical practice.
Shiva, I have a question for your fellows. Hello.
Yes, Ritesh, madam also is there.
I
Yeah.
have a question for your fellows.
Yes.
First of all, congratulations to all three of you. It was just an amazing, amazing presentation. Keep it up. So my question is, you are lucky to get a very high-end machine, or secondly, I might say you are also unfortunate that once you move out from Shiva's magic world, you will not be getting that very great clarity ultrasound machine. Okay. So you learn after completing your fellowship, and you learn in a once you start doing your work, here you saw everything. You saw the medial cord very nicely. You saw the lateral cord very nicely. You saw the posterior cord very nicely. I'm talking about lateral infraclavicular. Okay. Suppose you are not able to visualize anything. You got an obese patient. You use a low frequency probe, and you are just seeing only the axillary vessels. So how are you going to proceed for a successful block?
Like a mental aptitude test. Yeah, the clinical situations are different. Yes.
Around the axillary artery like a U shape.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but usually in the convex probe, you will not be able to see the cords. That was my question, you know. If you're using a convex probe, you will be able to see the axillary artery, but actually the cords are not visible very nicely.
So we can inject it at 6 o'clock position to the axillary artery and look for a U-shaped deposition of the drug.
So one is, instead of taking the brachial plexus element, you take the vessels as a landmark and then deposit.
Basically,
this is one way of overcoming the.
Basically, you can all fellows go to RAPM. There is an article in it that in a lateral infraclavicular, suppose your 12 o'clock is the cephalad portion of the axillary artery. Because you have got a lot of variations in the lateral infraclavicular, so the most important zones where you get all the cords, they are from 3 o'clock to 11 o'clock position. Okay, so suppose this is the axillary artery and this is the 12 o'clock. So from 3 o'clock till 11 o'clock, you have all the variations of the cords. So the most favor the place where you deposit the drug is a 7 o'clock position. If you deposit the drug at the 7 o'clock position of the axillary artery, whether you are seeing the cords or not, your effect, it will be delayed because you are not directly depositing near the cords, but the chances of success of your block will be high. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Rushali ma'am. Yes,
Thank you. Actually, Rupinder's question and what Ritesh has said are almost on the similar lines. Probably what we should be thinking about is how to still use a high frequency probe rather than changing it to a curvilinear and get the most out of it. So number one, perhaps we could switch on the mode of penetration. Number two, put a lot of pressure on your probe, because if he's an obese patient, he is going to have a lot of subcutaneous fat. So that gets your artery and the neurovascular space a bit more closer to the probe. So many a times this will help you seeing what you wish to visualize. So I feel
that's all the practical.
I mean, even 130 I have seen by doing these maneuvers rather than going to a curvilinear.
Yes. So other two modifications, what we can try is we have moved more towards the costoclavicular space. We will not exactly in the LI.
Yeah, come medial.
You come more medially and see whether the structures become superficial.
Yes.
Sometimes that also will be deeper, but these patients are obese and Curie OSA. We wanted to avoid all the supraclavicular blocks. What we have done is I have done the cases of proximal shoulders like this, about 20-30 patients, where they're really moribund. You can't go to this. So what we did at that time is we gone to the supraclavicular area and given only an upper trunk injections. That is very easy to see. You put 2 to 3 ml so that the pain will go off at the shoulder. You allow 10 minutes. Because these are very high morbid obese patients, you need 30 to 45 minutes to deal these patients. We will decide that, we will tell the surgeons, we will shift them early. This is the strategy by which we will do it. We give 3 to 4 ml in the upper trunk, allow them to stabilize. Once the pain is completely reduced, slowly abduct the shoulder so that you get your ergonomics. And even with an upper trunk, we have given axillary also and finish the shoulder. So these are all the modifications that you can have. One is apply pressure. You as much as possible use an high frequency, because the needle visibility is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
You can move to the costoclavicular space, or you can divide the blocks, give a little bit upper trunk and provide intense analgesia for the shoulder and get your positioning better and do the infraclavicular blocks, or you can use an axillary as well.
Shiva, do you do your all costoclavicular by out of plane needling?
Yeah. So now, as you see in the probe position, if you wanted to, the costoclavicular space is defined between the costo, that is a rib, and then the clavicle. So if we cannot see the clavicle because we are under the clavicle. So unless you see the subclavius muscle, which is the reference for clavicle. So if you don't see subclavius and then the serratus below, or the rib, you are not in the space. You may be in the medial infraclavicular space. The block is not a costoclavicular block because you are not in that space basically. So to get that view, you have to insinuate under the clavicle. When you go to that position, aligning the needle in that angle is a real challenge for anybody for that matter, because I have seen in 2017 where Madam also would have observed, Karmakar sir really struggled to get that needle visibility because it's just the physics. It's not about the person or the expert. So, and the in-plane needle placement restrict your needle movement. You cannot maneuver it. And we know that, yes, we can inject at the center of the cluster, but it doesn't prevent you to deposit in all other places. Suppose even in my injection, if you see the medial cord is not soaked, I will immediately pull out the needle, go to that target. But this maneuverability is absolutely nil in your in-plane. Sometimes it's become a real circus. Because the coracoid will be in place and you have to get into that angle, it's all compromise. So, but if it is a surface is a flat and superficial target, you can beautifully get your in-plane needle. Whereas in the supraclavicular and infraclavicular, where it is all in a different angles, it's a challenge. Whereas in lateral infraclavicular, the probe is vertical. Yes, you can try to get an in-plane. It doesn't mean that
I was taking part in the.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not about something is better or worse. It is the fact, if you choose that, you have to accept that difficulty and challenge. So that is why in costoclavicular, our default mode is an out of plane. And we have to train our candidates in out of plane needling as well, because in future, they are going to apply more of that than an in plane when they become as they become experts.
Yes. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I have one or two comments to make. These are from discussion with Dr. Sandeep Diwan. And we have seen a few patients, as Dr. Sandeep Diwan sir is with a lot of his videos, and he showed that how the vascularity can be challenging in the lateral infraclavicular area. And he said that in some patients, he has, looking at the vascular pre-procedural scan, he has decided not to intervene with a conventional approach. So there are many vascular anatomical variations, and which can pose a challenge to needling in this area. So I think if somebody is handy with out of plane technique, it is at least you can maneuver, you can plan. And in highly challenging cases, he has done this retroclavicular technique, and I have also tried it once. And what I have found is, as Dr. Diwan has guided us, we have curved the needle 15 degrees in front. So as we pass below the clavicle, directly it tends to move up at around 6 o'clock position, and there we deposit the drug. I'll just show you the small, from the presentation itself. I think somebody has shown this figure. So you can see here, I was just looking at a Google image. So once the needle is passed, it is landing at a 6 o'clock position here. So if we pass it straight, there is a chance, we are always fearful about pneumothorax. So curving it, little bit around 15 degree, and pushing it in a Kefauver direction, keeping the needle tip cranially, is one more maneuver. But needling, curving the needle is done more by a chronic pain physician than the acute pain consultants, more or less. But one of the relative contraindication for retroclavicular block is when the thickness of clavicle is more than 2.5 centimeter. When it is more than 2.5 centimeter, the no man, or the black zone, the artifact zone is much more, and we are really scared in those 2.5 centimeter where our needle tip is. So if a person is with a very thicker clavicle, then it is a relative contraindication for retroclavicular block. Another thing with PNS, as already Rushali madam and Hetal has demonstrated, but whenever in our institute also, whenever PNS, somebody is trying infraclavicular block and they are not getting it, the most common maneuver which we have done is, please move ahead, please go ahead. People are so afraid of pneumothorax in this area, and they are not pushing the needle further ahead. So most of the time it is lateral cord or medial cord, and little bit going down, and they get a posterior cord response. So that is the maneuver most of the time. So of course you need supervision and training in this area for the PNS. Now I have one question for Dr. Shiva. As he has mentioned, while doing a costoclavicular block, there is abduction for 90 degrees. Sometimes we have done overhead abduction for better visualization in a costoclavicular area. So could you guide us as how much abduction is beneficial in this to see a better costoclavicular, and your comment on the retroclavicular?
Yeah, the first regarding the shoulder abduction, this we have studied in infraclavicular axillary. The axillary vein is defined from the lateral border of the first rib, and then distal to that we will call it as an axillary. On top of the first rib, this is known as subclavian. So when we keep the hand by the side, the clavicle overrides over the rib cage, over the first and the second rib. So when we abduct this hand, the lateral end of the clavicle moves up, so that we can scan the 2 centimeters, and the clavicle moves from the target. That is, the cephalad movement of the clavicle is about by a mean of 2 to 2.5 centimeters. So that means when we are scanning the vessel proximally, you are scanning the brachial plexus element also proximally. So the abduction of the shoulder able to scan your brachial plexus 2 centimeter more proximal than lateral. So this is the dynamics that is happening with abduction of the shoulder. Some patients we may not be able to do it, so we will compromise. We will inject at the medial infraclavicular fossa. That time we will not call that as a costoclavicular fossa. That also we have done it. So movement, abduction to 90 degree elevates the clavicle by about 2 to 2.5 centimeters. And in that study, we have tried even a overhead abduction. It's not making a big change. On the other hand, this post-traumatic patients, it's really very cumbersome for them to do a overhead abduction. So we looked at that also. We are not gaining a very big benefit by overhead abduction. On the other hand, the pectoral muscles are becoming very taut, and your depth of your target also will increase. So it's not a flat surface. Moment you over abduct, all the muscles become very taut and you will not get the smooth surface. So the 90 degree abduction is a good balance. By overhead abduction, you are not gaining any big advantage over the 90 degree. So by abducting, we are moving the lateral end of the clavicle by about 2 centimeters, and we are scanning the target more proximally by about 2 centimeters. This is about the costoclavicular. When it comes to the retroclavicular, I have not tried, but I'm basically, honestly speaking, I'm scared. Try to put the needle from top and going under the clavicle. That is honestly my judgment about it. Whether you will try, very unlikely, because I'm getting what I want more safely, effectively, clearly. There is no drive for me to look at a more riskier route. That's all it is.
Exactly. When your initial
Yeah,
initial part of needling, you are in a blind spot, and that
so
around 2 to 3.
I was a bit scared. I mean, that's what I would say. And the third thing is about the engine, and this is for all the fellows. Yes, the good engine shows you a good target, but we will use the ultrasound to learn the anatomy. Please have that in your mind. By using a gadget, you should be enhanced, because you are now you are seeing the structures. When you left out without these instruments, you should be a better person. Capable, that means you are not using them to the purpose. So when I know this, by using an ultrasound, my three-dimensional understanding is improved. Now when I use my PNS or a surface landmark, I will be much more enhanced than a blind person. So if you are not in that zone, then you are not using the ultrasound for its purpose. The ultrasound should enable you to understand the anatomy better. So you will be a better person in your surface landmark after using an ultrasound. That shows that you are on the right track. Yes, Madam.
Dr. Shiva, good evening. Yeah, this is Dr. Somita.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, Madam, we can hear you. We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, this is Dr. Somita. Yeah, excellent presentation by all the three fellows. Just a small comment. Sometimes when we are doing the lateral infraclavicular block, it is very common to see an artifact, just next to the posterior cord or with the posterior cord. So in that way, yeah. What do you?
The posterior cord. Most of the time they miss people.
So,
I know. What we will do is only the hydro dissection. You give in that point. Once you give the local, it will show you whether the cord is there or not. Most of the time, it is just a post-acoustic enhancement. Sometimes posterior cord, as Ritesh told, it can be even more at 8 o'clock, or it has not migrated to the posterior side. So by hydro location, we will do that, and then subsequently, if you by scanning back and forth, you will know whether your cord is enhanced or not. Even in the video what we have shown, moment you inject in the right place, you will get the proper donut sign, because every cord has got its own paraneural sheath. If you give a local in a correct place and then scan above and down, you can able to pick it up. As you said, commonly the post-acoustic enhancement is mistaken as a posterior cord, and most of
right. Yes. Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Some very small questions to Shweta was presenting the scanning. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Shweta, have you always seen the cords the way you have shown us? Have you seen any variations? Do you know that there are variations possible? In the neurovascular space, I'm also talking about the artery and the vein.
No, ma'am. Sometimes it is not separately seen as 3 individual cords laterally.
So all the time, the first struggle is even though we put the labels, but in reality, they are not separate. At least before injecting, we can't see them as a separate targets. We are confused which one is lateral, which one is post. But this topographical arrangement is very consistent, demonstrated in an anatomical dissections. Moment you give the drug and then trace them down, then only there is a clarity that we can confirmly say that this is lateral, this is posterior, this is medial. But to begin with, it's only a reference from the anatomical study. We will label them, which is on top is lateral, and which is the most lateral is the posterior, and close to the artery is a medial. But this is fairly consistent in the costoclavicular. But once you come to the
Lateral.
LFC, it is
Then
unless you see it, you can't tell
Yeah.
anything. And the one more point I wanted, because we are not practicing it regularly, the LFC, but as we move laterally, sometimes the lateral cord and the medial cord give the roots of the median nerve on top of the axillary artery. It's not below. So sometimes the reason for the inadequate blockade of the terminal muscles can be a sparing of, suppose, if the lateral and the medial cord given their roots of median nerve much proximally, and you have injected at the 6 o'clock position, there is a chance that you might spare some of the fibers of the median nerve. That's also is there, because in every cadaveric section, the median root, from the lateral cord, the lateral root as well as the medial root from the medial cord, they come on top of the axillary artery. You know that at the axillary level, we are seeing the median nerve at the 12 o'clock position. So these branches come up at the lateral infraclavicular fossa. At what level they are joining is as an area of research. We are thinking all the time injecting at the behind. Yes, that has got highest success rate. But for the sparing, if some individual, if these median nerve taken off much earlier, we might spare them.
Yes. And anatomical variants are always possible.
Yes.
Even of the artery and the vein and their positions. Shomita has already highlighted the aspect of artifact. I had when you showed us the block demonstrations, I did not watch you giving a local infiltration before putting in your block needle. Had you sedated the patients, and do you practice LA infiltration of the skin, subcutaneous tissue, and deeper planes before you insert the block needle?
Yes, ma'am. We sedate the patient. We allow for grade 3 sedation before we perform the block. And also local infiltration before we pass the needle.
So we emphasize a lot on the procedural sedation, because that we all of us has to train the fellows, because otherwise they will.
I know. No, that is why I bought it out, because there are many fellows who are watching this.
The definite component of procedural sedation, we will target to a level of Ramsay sedation. Will sleep, but immediately respond to your comment, the meaningful comment. You should not go below that, because once only with the physical stimulus they are responding, they may not communicate to you when they have an intraneural injection. So you will target, they are calm, comfortable, awake, or fall asleep, but briskly respond to your comment is the plane, which is very ideal, that they will not perceive your multiple needlings, but still they are comfortable and communicate reasonably when they have a intraneural needle placement. So this has become a routine for all procedures. Procedural sedation is a very integral component. The endpoint is Ramsay sedation score 2 or 3. The commonly used agent is combination of midazolam and fentanyl, because this produces a very beautiful antegrade amnesia. At the end, when you go and speak to the patients, I have seen, even yesterday we did a pharmacological professor, costoclavicular block. She only remembers till she get position. We struggled a lot. I took almost 15 minutes to get the target in out of plane. I put the needle at least 10 times. She didn't remember anything. Only she remembered is, yes, you talked to me while you're abducting my hand. This is what the last I remembered. After that, only screws and bolts they are talking about. That is about 1.5 hours later. So if you go and speak to the patients, when you take them to a level of sedation, Ramsay sedation scale 2, 3, and interact with every patient at the end of and ask them what they've remembered at the last time. They've never even remembered, I'm positioned, I have put so much of needles. So that is the the benefit that we want. If you do like that, the requirement of GA is, the satisfaction score is 5 out of 5. She said, I didn't perceive anything. I'm very comfortable. I feel like I slept in my bedroom and that I woke up. I'm hungry. Can I eat something? That's the level of stress attenuation, and you are given rest to the brain as well.
Yeah, she did say sedation level, please, Shiva. She did
No,
say that.
we will.
She did say that. I remember. I mean, it's a nice training in the.
Yes.
You don't have to be so protective about her. She did say it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you always make it a point to scan the coracoid process?
No, because our lateral infraclavicular practice is
Doesn't
much
go
less.
that
We will
lateral.
palpate and mark. In both the patients, we have marked it. I showed them. So this is the coracoid process. Whenever you come, that's the reference point. Otherwise, they will go to the axilla, or they will come here. They don't know where to place the probe. So the starting point in LIFC is you palpate the coracoid process and place the probe just caudal to it.
All right.
One small quick question to Shiva sir.
Our fellows are, everybody is very quiet.
Clavicular block, as you are doing out of plane technique, needle is going almost 90 degree and hitting the target. So have you came across any problem with neurological injury or something, or prolonged block, and you had any issues with going out of plane in costoclavicular? Because our conventional teaching is do not hit the nerve at 90 degree when in an abducted arm the brachial plexus element are taut, and there are possibility of nerve injury or intraneuronal. So any issues with that?
Fortunately, till now it is not. But honestly speaking, either you go in plane or an out of plane. Whenever you go to the plexus, yes, theoretically we are speaking, we have to go to the corner and then deposit and create a donut sign. This is very beautifully happen in sciatic nerve or superficial targets, median nerve or at the axillary level. Whenever your target is about 2 to 3 or 4 centimeters deep, especially everything is together. Honestly, every time, whenever even I am looking at the experts, whenever it is very difficult to park your needle exactly like that. You will go into the cluster and give a hydro location that will disperse elements. Then only we will see whether you are into the cords or out of the cord. So in this process, when you are trying to reach the corners of some unbathed area, there is a chance that you are traversing some of the fascicles. I think that is all of us doing.
Yeah.
We have to agree about it.
Yes.
But we are not seeing the neurological outcome bad in our regular practice. This is the truth. But there is definitely some amount of injuries are happening to the axonal elements, but that is not severe enough to produce an obvious. So how to strike a balance is you should be very respect to the tissues. Your movement should be very gentle, and you should be aware of all these things so that you will minimize all these injuries. Every place you hydrolocate and see, I'm not swelling the components. So, and look at the patient, are they screaming? And your fellows, how he's feeling his injection. So these are all the 3 things that I am following in every single case. But I am aware that when I am trying to distribute my local, especially with the low volume, when we come to 15 ml, then you have to do this. Otherwise, there is only your movement will take the local to all the components. When you try to do this, we will injure some of the components, but by these mechanisms, we can reduce it. But it's not a 90 degree, it is go at an angle, but you will hydrolocate and then you see where you are. You are not into the cluster. That's the only thing that we can avoid. But you will be on some of the corners. That's, I mean, we can't avoid.
Any other fellows want to ask any questions?
Any questions?
Feel free here to just ask whatever comes to your mind.
Neeta, some question has come. You discussed about shoulder surgery with costoclavicular block, when we can use the proximal selective blocks. Yes, that is number 1. Question number 2 is kindly share experience of superior trunk and axillary nerve block for shoulder surgery, drug used and what form. Yes, it is about choice. When we go to the supraclavicular fossa and inject 20 ml, the incidence of phrenic nerve involvement is about 50%. So suppose you are dealing a patient who is obese, OSA or a COPD or patients who has got a compromised respiratory reserve, has got a shoulder surgery. Now you have to think, should I take that 50% chance or not? So right now in those particular situations, you have an alternative, which one has got a 5% chance. That is a costoclavicular. Still you will get the same results. It will soak all the components above the clavicle, but we don't know the duration. It is like you are putting a spinal at L2, L3, you will get a level of T6. So it is like the primary drug deposit at the costoclavicular space. The supraclavicular AC has a secondary spread. It is going to soak the superior trunk and provide a shoulder analgesia, but only the surgical duration and analgesia is going to be less, but you can do the surgery on that. So this is the difference between costoclavicular and supraclavicular for shoulder. The incidence of diaphragmatic involvement is the biggest change. So if you use a costoclavicular with 20 ml, you can do a shoulder procedures, but for the limited surgical duration and analgesia. If you do the same injection at the supraclavicular, say you may have for a 20 ml of equal mixture, you may have 3 to 4 hours of surgical anesthesia and analgesia for about 5 to 10 hours. This might be reduced a little bit with costoclavicular approach. We don't know how much, but this is the reference by looking at the spine. The superior trunk and the axillary is a difficult situation. You will mix and match. It's not very hard and fast rule. With the challenge in front of you, you will try to combine things so that you will achieve your endpoint. So that is what we did in a very complicated cases. We give a superior trunk so that the shoulder will get anesthetized, so that you can abduct the hand and do your costoclavicular or your axillary, so that you minimize the local above the clavicle, that you will not involve the diaphragm much. That's the only aim.
Anybody else? Ramurthy, any comment from you? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Signal.
I'm sorry. One question I wanted to ask was, they use 20 ml for the costoclavicular approach and about 15 ml for the lateral infraclavicular.
Yeah, that was a boy. You have seen the video. That boy is a 12-year-old boy. So we used the best volume. That's why. Even I wanted to ask Rushali madam, pediatric is we are just doing a rough guess only. I don't know what your practice is. At 0.2 to 0.5 ml per kg you will inject, or if you feel the spread is very good, you will stop at some point. I mean, how exactly you do in your everyday practice regarding the volume, how you decide that this is enough, or pre-calculated volume you will give it off, irrespective of the spread and dynamics.
Actually, it's an interesting question, and I have toyed with that idea many times as to what exactly should be the volume. Because if the surgery is very invasive, and I know that it's going to cause a lot of postoperative pain for a longer duration, and I do not have the facility to keep a catheter and walk away with a team to take care of it, I do go to a dose of 0.5 ml per kilogram of 0.25% bupivacaine. Okay. Otherwise, if it's a soft tissue incision here and there, then I stop as per the ultrasound image.
Great. That's a balanced route of. Yes, sure. I mean, we will also do the same thing. We'll go to 0.5% bupivacaine if it is a more invasive and long acting is required, or an equal mixture. Yes, fine. Yes, Ritesh, I think we are back to you. We are on time now. The time is 8:08.
Dr. Gaurav has some comment. Shiva, he's just put some comment. Maybe you should have a look at it before closing.
Gaurav, just a comment on a volume. Calculate the safe dose. Use only 70% of the volume in case you need a rescue. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, that's a good suggestion. Yes.
One question to Rushali madam. Like sometimes this placement of catheters with we saw some discussion on costoclavicular and infraclavicular. So placing the catheter tip in lateral infraclavicular is much more easier. We are doing it. But when it comes to costoclavicular, any special tips, Shiva sir and Rushali madam, anything?
Shiva, you take the question or I take it?
As such a catheter, our experience is very less, and my honest apprehension is whenever we will use only the 18 gauge epidural needle and 20 gauge epidural catheter, but I'm really scared to go between the cords with that blunt needle. And whenever even my fellows or colleagues they are doing, I'm really apprehensive. I'm scared to look at that image, the way it has been blown up. But in a real practice, whenever I want a prolonged analgesia, I use a 0.5% bupivacaine, and that itself is 10 to 15 hours of analgesia. So the usage of catheter as such is very less. We have used only when they have wanted to do a repeated elbow mobilization, or they are the replacement,
Okay.
or the plastic procedure where they wanted to every other day come for a dressing in the ward. We have done that. We kept the catheter, and for weeks together, we have done a repeated dressing, good repetition from the plastic surgeons. So in those situations, the concern is we put the epidural needle and distend this place and try to thread the catheter inside. But moment my catheter come out of the needle, I don't know where it goes. The 3 holes is I have to push in at least 3 centimeters, but I'm scared after that. If it works, personally, I will call it as a luck. It's not by complete my intent. So that's how I will take the catheters as of now, unless you use a specified design catheters. Maybe, I mean, madam, I wanted to ask really, Rushali, madam, how did they do the catheters? I mean, how exactly they did it and maintained it?
See, actually, Amit has 2 parts to his questions. Whether first costoclavicular or lateral. We simply do not put catheters in costoclavicular area because we use the depth to our advantage. Because if the catheter is in the deeper planes, it anchors better. And a superficial catheter avulses out easier, especially when children or adolescents, they want to move their hand very much. No matter how much you explain to them that you don't have to move, they still would move, especially when they're pain-free. That is number 1. Number 2, I understand Shiva's concern. And I too use epidural sets because I do not want any added costs here. So what we do is we use hydrodissection to our advantage. So we first create half the volume, calculated volume. We always give it before. Suppose if it's a 10 kilogram child, we give, and 5 ml is our dose, we would give 2 ml there. It gives us a good background on which the catheter is passed, and you actually can see the catheter coming out of the epidural needle as if the tongue comes out of a snake's mouth. And you just accept 1 or 2 centimeters ahead of it and inject now the rest through the epidural catheter and see the
whether it is the local spread in the target
local
area.
spread.
Yes.
Maybe this might not be so well seen above 40 kilograms, but below
Yes.
40
Pediatrics,
kilograms,
that is an advantage. You
well,
will confirm it most of the time. But in
yeah.
adults, we will struggle.
maybe 50 kilogram, 60 kilogram, that's difficult.
Challenge, yes.
That's why
Thank
we
you.
think we start doing pediatric regional.
Yeah.
Amit, can I ask one question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
please, ma'am.
Shiva, I wanted to know that you said that you sedated your patients before giving the block.
Yeah.
Now, can you assess the efficacy of your block? Are they able to respond well to that with this level of sedation or not?
I mean, honestly speaking, moment when we have become our, the injections are more consistent. When you know the anatomy very clear and then the drug spread, you are seeing everything objectively. Honestly, the assessment has gone down. We are not assessing it. In about 10-15 minutes, we will tell them to start the pre-wash. That time only we will know. They will tell us, boss, still he has got a pain. We will tell them, you wait for another 5 minutes, everything will be okay. This is how it's going.
Okay.
But that grade 2, grade 3 sedation, yes, moment you call them, they will wake up. They will obey your command for all motor activity. Even if you see that boy, you have sedated him to level 3, but he could able to sit in 20 minutes and do your commands. Where some patients will become drowsy, but they will able to follow your motor command. Sensory assessment may become a little bit shaky, but the motor will clearly tell you whether it is paralyzed or not. So we will take the motor endpoints than the sensory endpoint. They may not discriminate temperature well, but they will clearly show you the motor becomes 0. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Ritesh, over to you for concluding remarks. And I wanted to thank all the fellows. I really taken a task out of them for the last about 15-20 days to get it into the full shape, but they have given their full support, and I wanted them to make it as a recording so that there is no glitches. What you wanted to tell, let it be very clear and then precise, so that your communications are much clearer. So I think they've all done a good job. I hope.
For about presentation, could you give us some tips how the anatomy, the first presentation was really nice, and how fellows should develop this type of skills? Because I could see a lot of technical aspects to that as well. So
this is for all of our mentors. See, I'm just saying my experience. So this PowerPoint, what you're seeing now is the 7th or 8th round corrected PowerPoints. So this has started about 20 days back. We will make a framework. They will come back and then correct. So we will, to come to the conclusion, what chronologically you are going to order. That itself will corrections. The third of the things we have arranged, and this will be a better image. You put the video here. No, don't put this. You do that first. You do this second. You take that image or go shoot. All those things start 4th and 5th. When you 6 to 7 times and trying to look at what you wanted to tell, then only this will come to the shape. And only because they don't know what to do with this. This is their first presentation. They don't know presentation. So it is only see it in them, see them in what
Shiva,
and what they have done today. They know the difference, and that is the growth for them. Simply, that is the growth. This 8 presentations, what they made, is if they look at it, these 2 things side by side. This is my first when I go to sir, and this is my last when I presented. This is their growth. That is from us only. It is not. Yes, the number of times they comes, it is with them, but the correction is from us.
It was just
So we also like to thank Shiva sir because he helped us out a lot despite his very, very, very busy schedule. We had to wait for him multiple times, and then he, helped us out with so many inputs. And we also want to thank all the volunteers that we had used in this presentation. Thank you, sir.
That's great.
Ritesh sir, your voice is a bit
Hello.
low.
Hello.
Yeah, now we can hear.
Thank you all the fellows. It was just an amazing presentation. And, thanks, Shiva.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was just amazing. And thanks to all the fellows. And the task for all the fellows is those who have come read, well and good. Those who have not, go back, sit down, open your laptop, and just revise what was presented. And the recording of this will be soon in our Aura website. And thank you, President Ma'am. Thank you, all the mentors. And we will again meet next month. Till that time, be safe, but study. Okay.
Thank you.
Basic framework you have to do. You have to study. Mentors are always there to teach you, but the basic studying the anatomy, studying the book. Okay. So bye. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you, sir.